Hey everyone, this is Raphael from Ohio Tropics, and on today's episode we're going to talk about how you can get your Sansevieria cuttings not to rot. So whether you're propagating them in water or in soil, I'm going to give you some tips so that your cuttings do not rot. I know a lot of people have come to me with that, why are my cuttings rotting? Why are my cuttings rotting, right? So there are actually multiple things that you can be doing to ensure success. So we're going to talk about that today, okay? So number one, I'm not actually going to show how I take the cuttings. However, I did want to make one thing clear, right? So when you do take your cuttings, there's one super critical step that I would need to show, okay? So we're going to take this plant, and I actually propagated this one. These, you can see the leaf cuttings there that are sticking out from this. So when you do take a cutting, and actually these have been reclassified. These are now Dracaena instead of Sansevieria. I can't keep up with all the reclassifications of the botanical names, but snake plant, mother-in-law tongue, whatever you want to call them, right? So when you do take a cutting, let's say, we're going to take this leaf. You can take multiple cuttings off of one leaf and produce quite a few pups that way, right? So if you just cut the whole leaf off, let's say here, you know which way to stick it in the water or the soil, right? But if you take segments, right? So let's say here, oops. Okay, so let's say I have a segment right here from the middle. So I'm going to take several segments where I'm going to cut. I might have 3 or 4 cuttings from one leaf. Okay, let's say if I take this segment here in the middle, you have to have this cutting in the middle right here, right, oriented the same way as it is on the plant. You cannot turn it upside down. Let's say you cut this and then you turn the cutting upside down, it will not root. So that might be one reason why your cuttings are rotting. There are other reasons, including one reason that I don't think anybody is talking about, right? So I am going to tell you what that is. It's specific to water propagating, but make sure you have your cuttings in the same orientation that they grow on the plant, not upside down. Otherwise, they won't grow. So that's tip number one. But now let's talk about the 2 different ways. Actually, there are 3 ways to propagate Sansevieria, right? So the quickest way is, you have this one plant, this one pot. You could take it out of the pot and just divide them at the roots, right? You can even take a knife and go straight through to cut the rhizome, split them, and then you instantly have 2 plants or 3 plants, however you want to make, right? That's the quickest way. The other 2 ways that I wanted to talk about in this video are water propagation and soil propagation. Okay, so let's talk about water propagation first, and what you can do so your cuttings don't rot. Okay, now this one I took from a plant that I have upstairs in the living room. There are 9 cuttings that I took. I could have taken much more, many more actually. 9 of them, all 9 of them rooted and have pups now. Once you cut your leaf segments, like I said, right? These are kind of big. I could have made these, two cuttings out of this one if I wanted to, but I didn't. The thing that you want to do when you take your cuttings is you want to let the cuttings air dry for, let's say, 2 or 3 days, okay? And the reason that's important is that wherever you cut your leaf, that area will dry out and callus over, and that actually will help you prevent rotting. Okay, that's one tip that you need to follow, especially if you have tried before and they've rotted and you haven't had success. Tip number 1. So after you let them dry out for, let's say, 2 or 3 days, then go ahead and put them in water like I have in here. Okay. So this is a tip that I believe no one else is talking about. That's very important, right? We all know, we're supposed to change the water every so often, right? So change it, minimum once a week, but in the beginning, it may need to be more. So my tip here is you'll notice that when you have new cuttings, right? When you have new cuttings, you take them out of here. Now, again, these are already rooted. But what you'll see is the part that was underwater, you might feel a little bit of slime, right? Especially in the beginning, a little bit of slime there on the leaves. So you'll want to monitor your cuttings maybe every couple days, every 2 or 3 days. Take them out of your vase or whatever you're using to propagate in with your water, and run these under a faucet, warm water, and gently just rub off the slime under the water, under the faucet, to get that off and clean them off. Get them nice and clean. Okay, so do that with all your cuttings. Kind of gently remove that slime. Your cuttings could be very well rotting because of that. Okay, so do that with each one, and then also wash the propagation vessel. Dump the water out. Use soapy water, warm soapy water. Scrub the inside of it. Rinse everything out really well, and fill it back up with fresh water. So you don't need that much. I have probably too much here, but it's fine. Just maybe an inch or so, enough to cover the bottom of the cuttings, at least. Okay. Another tip is put these in fairly bright light, right? Don't put them in the dark somewhere. I actually have this one in an eastern facing window, so it gets morning sun. That's where they've been growing the whole time. Okay. So don't shove them in the dark somewhere, and give them good light. Keep them warm. Okay, keep them warm. Don't put them in a cold room. If you have a room that's cold in the winter and you're trying to do this, don't put them in there. Put them somewhere warm. Put them somewhere where you have bright light, right? And also make sure you change the water out. Gently clean the slime off of each leaf. You'll feel it. There's no doubt. There's no doubt about that. And monitor it, especially in the beginning. Once they get rooting, then you can let it go much longer without changing the water, and you don't have to babysit them as often. But it's very critical in the beginning to do that. So these tips will help you ensure that all of your cuttings will root. So that's water propagation. Okay. Now let's talk about soil propagation. So these I propagated from. Again, came from this plant. I got this plant at Lowe's for $5 maybe a couple years ago, something like that. And it had some physical damage on there, which is why they marked it down. So I took one of the tattered leaves. It was kind of an ugly leaf. And it was still a healthy leaf. It was just a little bit physically damaged, right? That's another tip too. When you choose your leaves, when you're propagating Sansevieria, you want to choose a healthy leaf, right? Don't choose one that's kind of sickly or yellow, or maybe it's a really old one. Don't do that. Pick one that looks healthy, that looks vigorous, and that isn't too old, okay? So this one I took 3 separate leaf cuttings from one leaf. And you want to follow the same advice as I described for water propagation as far as preparing the leaf, right? So again, when you make your leaf cuttings, right, don't turn it upside down. Let's say you have this middle segment here between my fingers. That's a leaf cutting. Leave it in that direction. Don't turn it upside down, because it will not root. Okay. Now, for soil propagation, what can you do to prevent it from rotting, right? So one important tip is to have the right soil. Okay. You still want to have the same light, put it in an eastern window and a western window. You may want to avoid full day sun for these. They can definitely grow in full sun. In fact, they do. I had the privilege of visiting Africa, and I saw these growing in the ground over there. Some of them are growing in full sun. They're just going to be a little bit pale, like a yellowish green, right? But when propagating, you still want bright light, but maybe not full sun. I've never tried, at least. I'll put it that way. But put it in an east or western window. I would say north would probably work too, right? Just make sure that it's in front of some window. Don't put them in the dark, okay? Okay, bright light, warmth, very important. Now for soil propagation, you do want to keep your soil moist, okay? Now when you're propagating, so I know that normally, right, when we grow these plants, we do want the soil to dry out. Now, established plants, I'm talking about established plants, like this one, right? I soak it thoroughly, dry it out, right? But when propagating, you want to keep the soil moist, okay? Now, you might run into, it might sound counterintuitive, right? You might run into an issue with rotting if you keep it too wet. However, there's one thing that you can do to help mitigate, right, that risk. And that's the soil mix. So you want a balance between a moist soil mix, right, and one that's way too wet. So what can you do? The solution is for really anything that you're propagating, whether it's Sansevieria or whatever, pothos, anything, you can blend 50-50, right, half and half, whatever soil mix you have, and with perlite. So half soil mix, half perlite. Mix it all up together, water it, it's nice and moist. So the perlite helps give you a fluffy soil blend, right? And when you water it, it'll stay moist, but it'll be nice and airy, right? It's not going to stay too wet, right? There's going to be air. So things rot from a lack of oxygen. So when you have root rot, it's because of a lack of oxygen that's in your soil mix. But if you add a lot of perlite when you're propagating, right, it'll aerate your soil. There'll be more oxygen, and you do want to keep it moist to encourage rooting. Moist and also warm temperatures to encourage rooting. And the perlite will prevent you from overwatering or keeping it too wet. Don't be scared of keeping that soil moist when you're propagating cuttings. You need to do that. You need to do that. So 50-50 potting mix and perlite. You can use a cactus mix, right? You can use even a regular potting mix would work fine, as long as you do 50-50, half and half, mix it up in water. Are my tips to help prevent your Sansevieria cuttings from rotting. Forget those. If you have failed in the past, if you have rotted your cuttings out in the past, remember these tips and you will be sure to have success, okay? So be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel below. Hit the bell so that you get the notifications so that you don't miss any of my videos. I know it's been a while since I've done these, but I'm going to try and do more. I'm actually doing a I have a couple extra videos that I'm going to do. One is my terrarium that you see here. I'm going to talk about how I built that. And I'm going to do another video where I'm propagating a ton of different plants all together as an experiment to show the different methods. So don't forget to also follow me on Instagram, Ohio Tropics, one word on Instagram. I'm very active there. And subscribe to my blog, ohiotropics.com, my houseplant care blog. If you've enjoyed this video, if you've had rotting, try it again with my tips. You will succeed this time. We'll see you next time.